Hi, welcome to TCG Scarab, and today we're going to be talking about the rules. Now, with the rules and stuff how going on, I know I've vaguely explained this before, and I'm going to do it again because I feel like I want to go ahead and explain this, and we're going to go ahead and be starting it in two different topics, and we're going to start with the how to build a deck. Now, this is pretty simple, and cards will be. I know I'm terrible handwriting, bear with me, but you're going to want 51 cards in your deck. Now, this is really important because 50 of these cards are going to be effect cards, and I will be explaining what those are in a little bit, but we'll start off with you only need 50 of them, and then you need one legend card, and your legend card is going to go ahead and be your main dude, your main creature. This is what your deck's built around. He has the effects you like. You're going to play your deck around this and how you're going to win. Now, how do you win, you might ask? Well, at the beginning of the game, you're going to take the top 10 cards of your deck and you're going to add them to a treasure pile. And whenever you win combat, whether by during offensively or defensively, you draw this, even during your opponent's turn, you can win. Now, how do you win combat, you ask? Now, every legend has an invisible combat power. So you'll hear me refer to this as combat power for the most part. It's invisible on the actual legend card, but it's at a 1. It can go down to 0, but it cannot go any further down. There is no negative numbers in this game. You can lose combat power, but you cannot go into negative combat power because that's kind of not fun and get set behind. Now, how do you get combat power? Well, here's where the other half of the deck comes in. The effect cards. Now, the effect cards are going to be your bread and butter if, the garnish is going to be the legend card. And the dealio with them is that's the rest of your deck. That's the rest 40 cards of your deck. Notice how I said 40 because, bam, they all go in your treasure pile. Whenever you win combat, draw that so you can draw into it more. But for the most part, you're going to have access to 40 from the get-go. Now that makes a lot of sense. We'll go off to the next half. I'll be explaining to you how the game you actually play it. Let's go ahead and start with a nice clean slate. So, whenever you have treasure cards, blah, 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 you already know that. Whoa, okay, no, bad. You already know that. So, what we're going to go ahead and do is, I want to play a legend card. Cool. At the beginning, it's already on the field. Cool. But I want to play an effect card. Here's the issue. You only have 5 spaces for those. You can play them in anywhere you want on the field, but you can only play 5. I know some people are really weird about how they have their deck set up. And personally, what I like to do is I like to have my legend right here and then kind of fanned out over it. That's just personally me. But that's neither here nor there. But the main thing is you only have 5 spaces on the field that you can play effect cards. And, why so little? Well, it's because I want you to conserve it and be able to predict what your opponent's going to do ahead. Now, whenever you activate a effect card, either by playing it or activating it from the field already, there'll be something called a turn counter attached to it. You'll see T and then a number, and that determines by how long it's going to be on the field. And you reduce the time counter on all of the cards you own at the end of the turn. Now, if you play a card that your opponent owns on your side of the field, that counts as your card for all intents and purposes. That being said, if you activate a card during your opponent's turn, it still gets reduced at the end of your turn during the end phase. And I'll be covering that in a little bit. Now, when I say activate, there's only one time during your turn when you may play cards. And I'll explain how you play the rest of the cards. So it's not just back and forth, bitch slap fight contest. Because honestly, a lot of the games when I started playing this felt like that because we didn't understand a good meta strategy of how to play the game, and that's a good thing. Like I played this several times and then it just changed. Like all of a sudden click with the person I'm playing with. Oh, hey, I can wait a minute to like activate my cards instead of just having my field just completely open. So you can during your main turn you can play it. You can play a card face up. We'll call this dude face up to you, and then you can play a card face down. Now, when you play a card face up, it is activated immediately, and you get the effect that it has. Hence the term effect card. Now, when you play a card face down, it stays on the field until you need to activate it. Now, you can activate these whenever you want. During your opponent's turn, whenever. This has a stack system very similar to Magic, where the first card activates has the last priority in a stack. So you can do things in response to your opponents. There is no speed system. They are all activated at the same speed. That being said, you cannot activate a card that is being targeted. And but what I mean by this, say we flip this dude, right? And I play this guy and I target, my opponent's card. We'll call this a card right quick. My opponent can't even act. So he wants to activate this card in response to being targeted. He cannot. So that card's basically useless while it is being targeted for some reason. It could be face up card and you target it, and that's kind of a non-issue at that point, is what that meant. But it's while a card is being targeted, it's effectively dead in the water. Now you can activate any other card you want, other than this little dude right here. Cool, perfectly fine. You can basically say, oh, I'm going to flip this up. This is a counter. Bam, I want to keep this guy right here because that card's really good, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, like that. You can do whatever. You can use like a redirect ability where it says, oh, hey, guess what? I want you to retarget towards yours, as long as you activate it from this dude and not this dude. That's kind of important. So one thing that's really important to realize is there's a couple more mechanics about that, and you'll see some interactions where you're stacking and you're really trying to protect a card and that wipes it out. Sometimes you just really need to protect that card until your opponent's turn because it's kind of game ending. You make one mistake, you goof. Sometimes it's worth protecting, sometimes it's not. Really up to you. Now, that's how you do things. You can increase your combat powers by effect cards. Effect cards, you can get multiple different bonuses and stacks if you really just want to have the biggest combat power, smack your opponent in the face pretty consistently. That's up to you, however you want to do it. Now, the next part that I am going to talk about is the phases, because this is a really important thing. There's only 4 phases in the game. There's draw phase, main phase, battle phase, and end phase. Now, draw phase is pretty simple. Here's where you draw a card. This is the beginning of your turn. Your main phase is when you are able to play cards. You may only play cards, either face down or face up, during your main phase. Battle phase is where you can go into combat with your opponent, and whoever wins combat gets to draw a treasure card. Now, here's the thing. You actually draw the card in your end phase, and during your end phase, you also activate whenever you actually can activate cards still during your end phase. There's still a time after battle to activate, but you cannot play cards, because I know a lot of card games you're able to go ahead and play there's another main phase. There's not another main phase with this one. Now, during your end phase, you also reduce all the time counters that are on all your cards by 1. And that's just where it happens at the very end of your turn. Now, talk about a couple of mechanics and interactions. We're going to talk about freeze. Freeze is a mechanic in the game where once you freeze a card, it cannot be activated for the rest of the turn. Regardless of its no longer being targeted, it cannot be activated. And these cards generally don't last very long, and they're just there to stall your opponent so they can't activate. It's not really removing the card from the field, so it can be a threat in the future. And what you want to go ahead and do is understand that they cannot be unthawed until the end of the turn or a card specifies otherwise. But that's in the nature of card games, that card rules overrule regular rules. Now, I want to go ahead and say that freeze is personally a really favorite mechanic of mine because it just stops your opponent from doing stuff. It's cheap. It gets off the field quickly. I'm able to do it. I will try to make as many archetypes as possible for people, but I really need people to play this, and I'm super grateful for whoever does. And I will try to answer as many questions as possible because I know that I might not have all the answers, but I will have all the answers, but I might not answer all your questions in this video, and I do apologize. And there's a couple more things I do want to talk about. We're going to go on. So, legend cards. I'm going to go ahead and go back to legend cards for a moment because I did skip over one really important thing, and I do apologize. Legend cards have something called counters and archetypes. And an archetype is on a legend card. We'll go ahead and draw this dude real quick, right? And so we're going to go ahead and go Shadow Creature. This will actually be in the set. I just didn't feel like pulling up the cards right now. And its archetype is called Shadow. Now, you get 3 of any counter during the game as long as your card has that particular archetype. So Shadow Creature, I just went ahead and just shortened it, just typing creature down here, gets 3 Shadow counters because he's part of the Shadow archetype or class. The official term is going to be class, but a lot of other card games go by archetype. But the class for it is Shadow, so one gets that. Now, there are going to be in the future, and I'm future-proofing this right now because I already know myself, there will go ahead and be multi-types. We'll call it Frozen Shadow Creature for right now for simplicity's sake. It'll have 3 Shadow or 3 Ice counters. And that's how you play your abilities. You have active abilities and you have passive abilities with all the legend cards. Legend cards will, right now starting off in the game, only have 2. 1 passive and then 1 active. And active will always be used with counter cards or counters. You remove a counter and you're able to activate an ability. That's pretty simple. A passive only activates when conditions are met. So, go ahead and take one that's whenever you counter a card, draw a card. That's pretty simple, and that's what I mean. There's a lot of once per turn, and the requirement for that is you can only activate this once per turn whenever you want, but it's only once per turn, so you can't spam passives. But I feel like that's really important to be able to play the game, and some in the future as well, some legends are going to go ahead and be able to activate a lot more because they have passives that allow them to generate counters. And those generally will be able to have, their abilities will be strong, but they won't have passives, so they'll be a little bit more inconsistent. So I did choose the beginning starting legends to not have those, due to, I feel like their abilities are really strong and you can get counters through cards themselves. And while we're on topic of how certain cards are, and I really should have covered this earlier and I do apologize, there are a couple cards that have a 0 turn counter. Those cards are played on the field, and then as soon as their ability resolves, they leave the field. Anytime a turn counter is reduced to 0, they leave the field and go into your discard pile. And yeah, that's That's pretty simple as well. There are a couple cards in there that reduce the turn counters, so phenomenal, great. So that's I feel like that's super important to talk about, as well as the last mechanic, which is recycle, which is just you grab a card out of the discard pile and put it into your hand. You recycle the card. That's pretty self-explanatory. But for the most part, if you have any comments, questions, or concern, please like, subscribe. I do actually have an alpha deck for sale that has the vampire, the skeleton, and the ghost cards for the legends. But this is a starter deck. It does not have a bunch of really rare cards, and the deck doesn't like combo with each other, but it's a good starter and to look like what a deck could look like, a very generic deck could look like. And I please, 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 at least check it out. Comment if you have any questions. I absolutely love hearing comments, questions, concerns. That just sounds great. Go ahead and you have a great day, and please watch more videos and subscribe.